Good morning. Today is May 23rd, 2022. My name is Frank Farmer, and we're here today as part of the Veterans History Project. Today we have with us First Sergeant Robert Colella. Sergeant Colella is a Army veteran, served over 22 years in the Army and now retired. He's also a veteran of the Second Iraq War and participated in two of the most famous or infamous battles, I suppose, noted for their savagery and how intense they were, the Battle of Fallujah and the Battle of Bakuba. So, Sergeant Colella, first of all, let me thank you for your service to this country, and thank you for coming here today to tell your story.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
All right. Well, first of all, tell us, when did you join the Army, and why did you join the Army?
I joined the Army in 1989. October 19th, 1989 was the day I shipped out to Fort Benning, Georgia. I joined the Army. It was something, military service was always something I wanted to do. I needed a little bit of a nudge, and I graduated high school and was working in a factory, and I was seriously wanting to join the Marines, but I happened to get in a little bit of trouble, and that was one of those things that the Marines weren't really into taking troublemakers at the time, but the Army, God bless them, was. So wound up joining the Army as an infantry guy. And
how old were you at that time?
19 years old.
Had anyone else been in the military in your family?
My grandfather. Actually, both my grandfathers were. My one grandfather served in the Navy for 4 years, not during wartime. But my other grandfather, from my father's side of the family, he was drafted. He was an infantryman. He was a mortarman. Won ashore. He was part of the Yankee Division. Won ashore about a week after D-Day and was wounded in Nancy, France, and severely wounded. And he found himself on a hospital ship and a pretty long road of recovery, and that was about the extent of his military service.
And what was the year you joined the Army?
1989.
And when you joined the Army, where did you go for your basic training?
Fort Benning, Georgia.
How long was your basic training? And tell me about what was your opinion of the quality of your basic training?
Sure. So, well, Fort Benning, the basic training part was 3 months long. And then you went into what they called Advanced Individual Training, or AIT, and it was considered OSUT, One Station Unit Training, where some people go to basic training and then after that they ship to another duty station for their advanced individual training. Fort Benning is a one-stop shop. So
you were there for both your basic and your AIT?
Yes, sir.
And what was your MOS, your military occupational specialty?
Sure. So my MOS was an 11 hotel. So I was an anti-tank gunner. Primarily, back in Vietnam, they used to have the 90 millimeter recoilless rifle. And that was kind of like the anti-tank weapon of the day. And the tow missile was the new improved anti-tank. So that was a wire-guided missile.
So when you went through your advanced individual training, you became qualified as a tow missile crew member. Is that correct?
I did. That's correct.
And tell us about a tow missile. First of all, what does TOW? TOW. What's that stand for?
TOW stands for Tube Launched Optically Tracked Wire Guided Missile.
So these are guided by wire. They're connected to a wire.
Yes, sir. And you can fire. It's tracked, so you have a sight system that you can fire during day. You can shoot it at night. The optics are thermal. You track it. Maximum effective range is right around 3,750 meters. They have a couple different variations of that missile. And it pretty much can defeat anything on a modern day battlefield.
How many crew members made up a unit or tow or crew?
It depended on what kind of platform it was on. So they have, in light infantry units, you have dismounted tow systems where, it's typically 3. So on a Humvee, you would have a truck commander, you would have a driver, and then you would have a tow gunner. Same thing with like an M113 personnel carrier, or if it was dismounted, the same truck crew would be the ones that were humping the equipment as well.
So these were primarily, I assume, designed for war in Europe, for open terrain, for against armored vehicles. Is that?
Absolutely. Definitely one of the go-to weapons during the Cold War when you're sitting there looking at maybe the Mongolian horde of Russians on the other side of the border. Of course, Korea, North Korea, China. But these weapons were specifically designed for just that.
Now, you mentioned the maximum range that you could hit an armored vehicle. Was there a minimal range that was recommended?
Yeah, I think 65 meters was the minimum arming distance for those missiles. I think
That's pretty close.
It is close. And then you have the TOW-2 Bravo, which was the most recent, at least when I was in, it was the most recent missile. And I think that went out to 110 meters before it armed itself. Okay. And that was a top attack. So it would go over the tank instead of trying to hit it on the side where the turret met the hull, or this would be a top attack where the missile would actually fly above your point of aim. And then when it got over a mass of steel, it would have a penetrator that would penetrate, and then it would have another round that went right behind it. But the most weakest point within those armored vehicles are the tops. So pretty crafty.
That sounds like a pretty lethal weapon.
Very lethal.
After you trained for that, where did the Army send you?
Fort Ord, California. Went to Fort Ord in beginning of 1990. Panama War had just concluded. And I went to 7th Infantry Division. And then from 7th Infantry Division, I was subsequently assigned to Fort Hunter Liggett, which is the Training and Experimentation Command for the U.S. Army out that way.
And what did they do? You said training and experimentation.
Yeah, so we worked on a lot of things, to include the Army's M1 Abrams tank when that was coming out. They actually had the M1 had already been launched, but there was a multiple acquisition platform that they're putting on the M1, so we trained on those. Laser rangefinders, different aircraft platforms that could scan the battlefield and find minefields. And so we basically were the people when they came up with some sort of equipment or tactic or process that they wanted to test. We were the go-to people. Okay. I don't want to use the word guinea pig, but we were.
Okay. Well, after this training, where did you go then? You went to Korea at one point, did you not?
I did. So while I was out at Hunter Liggett, the first Gulf War happened, and we transitioned.
That was 1991.
That was 1991, and we transitioned from 11 hotels to 11 mics. We went out to Fort Irwin, California.
And what's 11 mic?
That is a Bradley crew member, a Bradley fighting vehicle crew member. Okay. And so a tow gunner is 11 hotel, a Bradley crew member is 11 mic, and with the Gulf War happening, it was just one of those things where they needed more 11 mics than they needed 11 hotels. They didn't know what the casualties were going to be during that war. They sent us down to Fort Irwin in Southern California to be trained and transition to 11 mics. And from there, I wound up going to Korea.
And what was your unit's mission in Korea? You went to Korea. What were the years that you were in Korea?
92, 93.
Okay. And what was your unit's mission in Korea?
So I was assigned to 2nd Infantry Division's 2nd Brigade. And I was part of their S3 shop, so their Operations and Command Center. Worked in the brigade headquarters there. We had a real world mission there. You know, it was defended demilitarized zone from North Korea, and that's what we did.
Were there any incidents? There's usually incidents that the public doesn't know about that occurs between North Korea and South Korea with troops. Did you have any incidents over there while you were there?
Outside of the occasional defector that made it across the DMZ.
Were there many of those?
Occasionally.
From North Korea down
Yes,
to
sir.
South? Really?
Yeah, we didn't really have a whole lot of incidents. Everything's pretty, especially during that time. It was still pretty. I mean, it's still pretty tense, but you know, it's. I think the stance and the readiness prevented a lot of incidents, if you will. So it was pretty status quo.
What was your opinion of the South Korean troops that are over there?
South Korean troops were amazing. They're definitely our partners. They take ownership of, you know, their land, their country, and they're certainly professional, well-disciplined, well-equipped, and well-focused.
What was your opinion of the North Korean troops?
I don't really have a whole lot to base, you know, as far as interactions, but as far as like what I know, what I've read, what I've seen, I think at that time they have a lot of people, but as far as training and discipline and sustainment and, you know, the ability to leverage technologies and all of those other things that we're able to do, I don't think they're there. You know, I think, you know, a lot of people would use the term a paper tiger because of their equipment and, you know, their discipline and their ability to sustain. They have a lot of people, a lot of equipment, but, you know, what is the ground truth there? I don't know.
Now that was in the 90s. You said it was after the first Gulf War, which occurred in 1991, and of course the Iraqi troops collapsed very quickly. The first Gulf War. That was under the senior George Bush. You're in the military in the 1990s. At some point, you had apparently made a decision that you were going to stay in the Army and make a career. Did you not?
Yeah, that was right around the 11th year mark.
Was that so? You were sometime in the late 1990s, and you had been, I assume, at various duty stations. You said you were in Korea for 2 years. Is that right?
Yeah, actually, I went back and forth to Korea 3 times.
Okay, so so during the 90s, you were back and forth to Korea, and you made a decision to stay in the Army. And before we know it, it's 2003, and the what some people refer to as the second Iraqi War breaks out, supposedly for the reasons that Saddam Hussein was harboring terrorists that would strike the United States, and also because there were suspicions that there were weapons of mass destruction, and he had stopped the nuclear inspectors from coming in. So the Second Iraqi War began in 2003. Your unit went over to Iraq in 2004. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now you did 2 tours of duty in Iraq. 2004 was your first tour of duty?
Yeah, with 2 different units. Yeah, so the 04 tour was from Korea. So again, I was over, same unit that I was over there in 92, 93. I actually went back in 97, 98, and then I went back over in 04. And all 3 times it was with 2nd Infantry Division and 19 Infantry.
So were you still associated with the Bradley fighting vehicles?
Yes,
Is
sir.
That, I want to ask you some questions about the Bradley vehicle that comes up, but the Second Iraq War, the Battle of Fallujah, takes on great importance. Most people in America have heard about Fallujah and how vicious the fighting was. It was door to door, a lot of urban combat. Actually, there were 2 battles of Fallujah, I believe. There was one that was in March and April of 2004. The United States supposedly won, but soon after that, the whole thing fell apart. The whole Iraqi government fell apart, and insurgents began to appear from all over. So tell us were you involved in both Fallujah in April and May of 2004 and in November, December when the United States went back into Fallujah?
Yeah, so the first Battle of Fallujah I was not part of. I was in Ramadi. We were doing operations out of Junction City or Camp Ramadi, and we operated in and around the city and the Sunni Triangle. So when they started building up for the second Battle of Fallujah, my unit, my company, not my whole entire unit, but my company was selected to go and support a Marine unit. Bradley fighting vehicles, infantry, and tanks. And what had wound up happening was we were assigned to, I think it was the 23rd LAR or 25th LAR. That's light armor reconnaissance, so it's the Marine Corps' version. Similar to a Bradley, it's a wheeled vehicle. It's got a 25 millimeter cannon on it, but they needed a lot more firepower and support. So we wound up getting attached to them, and we went in. So when you look at the map of Fallujah, you have, I believe it's Tigris and the Euphrates, but the I think it's the Euphrates, and forgive me for not recalling off the top of my head. But there's basically a peninsula, and our job was to go onto this peninsula, clear all the houses, clear all the structures, and secure 2 different bridges. And then basically it was a feint to take a lot of the enemy fighters that were positioned in the north of the city and try to draw them into the south and western sides of Fallujah, because they didn't know we weren't coming across those bridges. They didn't know that at the time, so it gave us the ability to force their hand, split their units, bring them down, and we were there for 24 hours before the main attack happened from the north.
Now, I'm sorry. Did you say this was the first battle or the second battle?
Second battle.
Second battle of Fallujah.
Yeah, I don't know a whole lot about the first battle.
Well, the first battle was precipitated, as I remember, because of the death of 4 civilian contractors that had gone in. This was in April and May of 2004. They were part of the Blackwater security team. They were ambushed. Americans were killed. Their bodies were desecrated, burned, and then hung from the bridge there across the river you're talking about.
The 2 bridges that we were securing, the North Bridge, they were hung from.
Okay, so the United States had gone in at that point, said they'd won, and then left. And then all of a sudden, insurgents came in, which led to the second battle, which you're describing to us now. Is that correct?
Yeah.
The insurgents, were you surprised? Were any servicemen surprised about the number of insurgents that came from many places in Al-Ashawari and converged on Fallujah?
Yeah, so absolutely. You know, I think a lot of people foolishly underestimate, the enemy. And there was plenty of variety. You had, Saddam Hussein's loyalists. You had people that were born and raised in that city. You had your foreign fighters. You had Shia. You had Sunni. You had all sorts of different factions inside the city. A very, very complicated battlefield. And a lot of people have different motives, right? And so some people just want to defend their areas. Some people want to push their military objectives. Some people want to just flat out kill Americans. Some people want to fight Sunnis, and some people want to fight Shias. So it was definitely a complicated
Well, the
battlefield.
Shia and the Sunnis were all part of the Muslim religion, but they were different sects, and they had an antipathy against each other that was pretty bad. But some of the sergeants came from other countries, did they not?
Absolutely, Syria, Morocco, you name it. They came. They came far and wide.
And what was your opinion of the fighting ability of the sergeants that descended on Fallujah?
Anywhere from expert to amateur, and everything in between. You have, yeah. I mean, they're ferocious.
Now, the Battle of
Fierce.
Fallujah that you were involved with, that went on for weeks,
Weeks.
as I remember it. And it was compared, because of the house-to-house fighting and the urban combat, it was compared to way in the Vietnam War, which was house-to-house and very vicious, was it not?
Yeah. I mean, it absolutely was. It's one of those things where you're on edge every single day, every single minute, you don't know what's behind those doors. You don't know what's around the corner. You don't know what's on the roofs. You're just, you feel like you got a bullseye on your back for weeks.
Now, your unit suffered some casualties during that time, did it not?
Yeah, we had my platoon and my company that was there. Fortunately, we didn't have not one KIA, but we had quite a few wounded in action. And then we had some Marines that were attached to us that were combat engineers, and they were digging in some fighting positions and stuff like that. And it was day 2 of the battle, and a lot of chaos, a lot of crazy stuff was happening, a lot of indirect fire, a lot of direct fire, and indirect fire was between missiles, rockets, and mortars. And unfortunately, one of their I think it was like a D8 or a D9 dozer that they're using to build a position for one of our Bradleys right on the edge of the river. It overshot for some reason, or the ground gave way and the dozer fell in. That Marine drowned, and his battle buddy jumped in to save him, and he also drowned. That was like day 2.
I think you had a recovery mission, or you took part in a recovery mission to retrieve those bodies, or?
No, actually, I mean, it was all part of the recovery mission. I mean, we were to pull security for them, because this happened really, really early in the morning. It was night. We're still slugging it out with the enemy. And so what we wound up doing is just bringing all of our forces into that specific area to provide security, so the Marines units could come in and do the recovery portion of that. And the vehicle, we left that vehicle there all the way up until I think like 2 days before we pulled out. So maybe like a day or 2 before Thanksgiving, that dozer just sat there in the river.
Now, you after the United States went into Iraq for the second time in 2003 and 2004, supposedly there was a loyal Iraqi army that fought with the United States. What was your opinion of that loyal Iraqi forces fighting ability?
It fluctuated. Some people were there for a paycheck. Again, people's motives are, very, like they just don't get it like we get it, right? It's not that they aren't loyal to their country. It's just trying to take civilians and make them into soldiers was a huge undertaking, right? A lot of the professional military didn't even have the funding or the discipline or the structure, and corruption really impacts a lot of that as well. So there were a lot of great soldiers there. I've worked with some that actually are U.S. Army soldiers now. One specifically is a lieutenant in the Army and military intelligence.
Really?
So yeah, some of them, he operated as a interpreter for us, and over the years, he wound up becoming an American citizen, and he is now serving and living the American dream. So, it fluctuates, but I think corruption really had a lot to do with it.
Now, you talked about the Bradley fighting vehicle. Tell us what a Bradley fighting vehicle is, what's its mission, and how it's armed, its crew, etc.
Okay. So a Bradley fighting vehicle is a tracked vehicle. It replaced the military's M113. The M113 was like the military's workhorse during Vietnam, and as far as armored personnel carriers, but it wasn't armed. It was lightly armed. It had 50 cal. You could put a tow missile on it, so on and so forth. But when the Bradley come of age, it was specifically designed for the Cold War. It was designed to fight Warsaw Pact, the Russians, China. So it's about 32 tons of steel. It has a speed of about 35, 40 miles an hour, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. It has a turret that spins 360 degrees. It's crewed by a man of three. You have a driver, a gunner, and a Bradley commander. And then you could put 7 plus or minus a couple dismounts in the back of infantry soldiers.
So it's also a troop carrier.
It is.
As well.
It's pretty lethal. It's there's a lot of things on the battlefield that the insurgents respect. And there's a lot of things on the battlefield that the insurgents respect and fear, and the Bradley is definitely one of them because, it's not just one Bradley. Typically you have a platoon or a company of Bradleys. So that's 14 armored personnel or Bradley fighting vehicles, and every one of them have about 7 people in the back armed to the hilt. Plus the Bradley itself has a 25 millimeter chain gun. It has a tow launcher that has 2 tow missiles capable of firing. It has a coaxial machine gun, which is a 7.62, and it also has smoke grenade launchers, and depending on what variation of the Bradley fighting vehicle, it has firing ports on the sides to where the guys that are in the back, if they're not on the ground and they're in the back, they can also shoot left, right, and back.
How
lethal.
How armored was the Bradley fighting vehicle?
So, the armor, is pretty heavy. It's designed to go up against, the Russian BMPs and BRDMs, and it's not going to absorb a main tank round. But we also have what's called reactive armor. So, and reactive armor, you bolt that on, and those are like square tiles that have basically like an explosive charge that if an RPG or another round is coming in.
RPG being a
rocket propelled grenade. Yeah. So if an RPG was coming in, it would hit those tiles, and then the explosion would force it back out versus into the vehicle.
So you said it's obviously a lethal weapon. The insurgents knew it was a lethal weapon, but yet they came up with some ways to try to neutralize or kill the Bradley vehicle, the improvised, the IEDs, the improvised explosive devices, correct?
Yep.
And in your book, and by the way, we're going to discuss your book, The Battle of Bakuba, when we get to the Battle of Bakuba. But in your book, you described some of the ingenious ways that the insurgents came up with IEDs. So tell us about the IEDs and how that became such a lethal weapon against Americans and against armored vehicles.
Yeah, so the improvised explosive device, pretty much anything that was on the ground. I don't think there's anything in any military's inventory that was 100% survivable through an IED. There was different types of IEDs. You had, ones that were made out of leftover artillery rounds, right? 155 millimeter artillery rounds. At the very beginning, there was tons of them around, where they would take the artillery rounds and they would stack them, and they would either bury them just below the surface or put them on the sides or put them on guardrails or overpasses and what have you. And, they could detonate those with, trip wires, pressure wires, command det, where, they would have sometimes a garage door opener, sometimes a cell phone, sometimes a base station from a regular wireless telephone. Tons of different ways to kill Americans that came
Now
up
these
with.
were very lethal, even
Extremely.
in an armored vehicle.
Yeah.
Did the United States react by putting more armor on or changing the configuration?
They did. They actually, that's a great question. Excuse me. They certainly did. They put extra armor on and belly armor, because underneath the vehicles, to withstand explosions. Of course, the reactive armor on the side. So there were different things. And then we had, like, if it was a cell phone, we had jammers that were on some of our vehicles. And our dismounts as well, they would have different devices that they would carry that could jam the cell phone signal to where they couldn't remote det an IED. But then they just came up with a pressure plate, right? So, if they can't do it with that, then what they would do is they would design something to where it was more or less like a tripwire. If you rode over it and you connected, made the connections, the IEDs would go off. Or they would do a command det where they would, just like an old Claymore mine, where they would run common wire out hundreds of yards, and they could sit in a house, wait for your vehicle to ride by that mark, and they would just have a battery there and, make I mean, sometimes it would just be a battery, sometimes they'd have a switch. They got pretty ingenious, where they would plan all these IEDs, do the command det, and the command dets were basically where they would have like stereo jacks where they could quickly plug them in, make the connection, do what they had to do, unplug it, and move on.
Now, they were also very adept. The insurgents were very adept into hiding these or concealing these. I think I read in your book that they used to take old tires, melt the tires down, and put them on, plant an IED in a hole in the road, put the melted rubber, look like asphalt, and it may be weeks or months, and it would look like a road. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah. So, but they would actually put the blacktop back over it, not the rubber. So they would use the tires to heat the blacktop, scoop it out, dig a hole, put the explosives in there, and then put the heated. They would heat it back up, put the blacktop over it, and cover it up.
So the battle ended up with a large number of American casualties, and I said most people have heard about the Battle of Fallujah. Your first tour came to an end. You came back home, but you rotated back over for a second tour in 2006. Is that correct?
Yep.
And was that time for your unit to go back to Iraq, or did you go back as an individual and join another unit, or?
No, it was that unit's rotation. Just luck of the draw, I guess. When I came back from my first tour, since I deployed from Korea to Iraq, my wife was already at Fort Hood, because I was supposed to go to Korea, do 12 months, and then go to Fort Hood, but that didn't happen. I went to Korea, from Korea, went to Iraq, from Iraq, was briefly redeployed to Fort Carson, Colorado, and then I went to my return assignment, which was Fort Hood, who just so happened to be returning from Iraq too. And really the rotation was basically, for a unit like Fort Hood, it was roughly a year back, and you go right back into
So
a
there were a
trade-up
lot of
mode.
people that did two tours.
Oh,
over
yeah.
a whole bunch of people. So
Absolutely.
you're back for your second tour, and in your second tour, the Battle of Bakuba took place. So and you wrote a book about the Battle of Bakuba.
Yes, sir.
So first of all, where is Bakuba located, and why was that so important in the strategic plan of the United States? And of the insurgents also, I suppose.
Yeah, so Bakuba is north of Baghdad, about 40 or so miles. It's in the Diyala River province, or Diyala River Valley, rather. And Bakuba and Diyala is supposed to be like the example of different factions living together, right? They had Sunnis living there, they had Shia, they even had Christians living in and around Bakuba. And that was basically the melting pot for Iraq, and that's what they were really trying to promote Bakuba as, a victory, right? And what the rest of Iraq
when you
could
say
be.
they, you're talking about the Iraqi government, the quote friendly Iraqi government.
Yeah, the Iraqi government plus the United States and the coalition forces are like, hey, look, we're doing it here. We could do this in Fallujah, we could do this in Ramadi, we could do this in all these other areas.
Well, what happened in Bakuba? Because it didn't stay real quiet and friendly. What happened?
It didn't, and I think the really interesting thing is I never even heard of Bakuba before I went there. And the unit that we relieved over there, it didn't really sustain a whole lot of casualties. They were over there doing monitoring missions. They were building an Iraqi police department. They were not really engaged in fierce fighting. The town itself was, they had a semi-functioning government, but that was really, in my opinion, and a lot of other people's opinion, it was all a facade. And what they didn't want to happen in Bakuba and the Diyala River province was, or DRV, Diyala River Valley, was they didn't want to rock the boat. If they started killing Americans, the Americans would start doing operations, and then that would in turn start to disrupt what they were doing. And what they were doing was the Bakuba and Diyala area was actually like a headquarters. It was a main training area. So it was really a lot of things were being done covertly, if you will, to where the military, they didn't rock the boat, and we didn't push. And we didn't really have the troops up there to do it anyways, right? So when we came in there, it was one of those things where mosque monitoring, again, building the local Iraqi army and police presence and the government was the focus. And unfortunately, that gave them an ability to build a pretty significant defense, like I was telling you, or like you had mentioned, where they were building these.
The insurgents building.
Yeah, absolutely. So, they had a lot of command and control up there. They had a lot of ability to just really hiding in plain sight to do things up there. But when basically the troop surge was happening, that's when things really started to change.
Troop surge was in early 2007, if I remember. That was under General David Petraeus.
Yep.
That pushed it. So were things getting? Did that precipitate fighting up in that area as the Americans pushed back up there? Or did the insurgents consider Bakuba to be kind of their Alamo, where they were going to take their stand and fight it out to the end?
They did. It's pretty interesting the way things had unfolded. Was things were just starting to heat up in general in all the various areas, to include our area, and we had a couple different political parties up there. We had a Shia political party, we had Sunni political party, and a couple of things had happened where we went from like simple patrols and building the community to more kinetic operations. And as that started to happen, we started to realize what the enemy presence was there, and we were drastically outnumbered in the Bakuba area, and things really started. And this was pre troop surge, where things really started to heat up, and we found ourselves battling it out almost on a day to day. But then when the troop surge happened, and they surged into Ramadi and Fallujah and Baghdad, a lot of the insurgency, they some stayed and fought, but that was really just a delay in action. And a lot of the insurgents started to backfill and funnel through Baghdad up into the Bakuba and Diyala areas. And we didn't have the troop surge there yet. So, basically we took a situation that went from pretty docile, right, and very few casualties, to straight kinetic operations where we were outmanned. And I think a lot of people, I mentioned it in a book, is like, we're the United States Army, we should never be outmanned, we should never be outgunned, right? To include me being a company first sergeant, right? Like, I have 100 and some odd people. I have, Bradley fighting vehicles. I have M1 tanks. I have air support. But somehow, some way, we were finding ourselves slugging it out.
So the hardcore insurgents had gathered up into Bakuba.
Yeah.
Your unit, and again, it was also urban warfare during that period of time, right? House to house and.
Yeah, there's a lot of urban, and being that we were along the Diyala River, there's tons of vegetation too. The palm groves extremely thick, extremely brutal to fight in. So we had a little bit of everything there.
Now, did your unit suffer any casualties during that period of time?
Yeah, we sure did. My unit, my company, had 32 wounded in action. We lost 14 guys.
That's a very high casualty rate. How long did the Battle of Bakuba last?
Well, so straight fighting, I'd say probably about 9 months. We were there.
Did we finally clear it out, or did we finally just pull out? And
No, we cleared it out. We handled our business.
Okay, so
and we did. Yeah.
So the U.S. friendly Iraqi forces won that at a high cost, at a high casualty,
very high casualty
rate. And did you get the opinion during that period of time that the insurgents were becoming more resilient, becoming more resistant, becoming more determined to fight the Americans?
Yeah, for sure. We had people come. We actually had fighters coming from Afghanistan over there too. So a lot of seasoned fighters were coming from Afghanistan. We had the Iranian influence, right? A lot of people don't get it, but Iranian, that war by proxy is a big thing. And those, we were talking about the IEDs, but there was one very deadly form of an improvised explosive device that would penetrate the hulls of M1s and Bradleys and MRAPs and all that. And they came from Iran, so you had the Iranian influence, you had the Afghan influence, you have, and Sunnis, you had influence from Saudi Arabia. It's a pretty big fight over there, and they were very well organized, very well funded.
Now you've told us your opinion of the quote friendly Iraqi forces, but your unit also operated with another group or sect, the Kurdish forces.
The Kurds, yeah.
And your opinion of them was much different, I think, was it not?
Yeah. So again, I think it all depends on leadership and what you're fighting for. And it's funny when Bakuba really started getting hot. We were begging for the Iraqi forces to come and support us because the troop surge was happening in Ramadi and Fallujah and Baghdad. We're steadily getting, into firefights every single day, and we needed more people. And it didn't matter if it was the Iraqi forces. It didn't matter if it was American forces. We needed boots on the ground, and we finally convinced one of the local Iraqi units to come to Bakuba. But when they found out that they were coming to Bakuba, they actually had a mutiny, and they said they weren't coming. So it's like, okay, well, where are we going to get fighters from? And the chain of command at brigade and higher level wound up getting Kurds to come in and live with us and fight with us and die with us. They lived with us in the same strongholds, the same outposts.
Your opinion of them was pretty high.
Yeah, absolutely. They were in it to win it, And the Kurds, I think they knew what freedom was up in the north. And they weren't. They knew that they didn't want to be under Al Qaeda, so they knew what the stakes were.
Now, we talked about casualties from IEDs, casualties from enemy fire, etc. But also one of the things that caused casualty was the heat over there. So your unit must have constantly had to deal with it. Well, how did you deal with preventing heat casualties?
Just knowing, like, you have to have a sustainment plan, right? Like, you patrol at night, you patrol in the morning, you send out various patrols during the day, because if you're not out there, the enemy is, right? So even in the heat of the day, where it literally is 120 degrees out, you're in armored vehicles, you're in Humvees, you're walking on the ground with 100 plus pounds. But, having vehicles to drop water, to drop ice, having your everybody in the unit was very proficient at giving IVs, and it was nothing to sit there. And if you had somebody that was, becoming a heat casualty, we would sit there and just strong point in someone's house. We'd go in, we'd set up a defense, we'd hydrate, we'd give them an IV, we'd handle our business, and we'd move on.
So in addition to heat casualties, and everyone knows that Iraq is very hot, but Iraq can also be very cold, can it? I mean, it can be freezing, couldn't it?
Absolutely.
Is that so? Is that, I assume that's at night?
Well, during the daytime it gets pretty cold there too. It's during the winter it definitely sends some challenges to leadership as well. It really does.
Well, it's kind of hard to imagine being possibly a heat casualty on one hand, and on the other hand, getting frostbite. But I guess that's that's the way it was. You returned to the United States from your second tour in November of 2007, and was assigned as a senior military instructor at the University of Florida. University of Central Florida, ROTC program. Is that correct?
Yeah.
How'd you like that?
It was awesome.
And how long?
Not at first though. It was, you take somebody that's pretty much did 2 back-to-back tours in some of the most inhospitable areas, and 90 days later you re-sign them to a University of Central Florida. It was quite the transition. So, but it turned out to be a blessing. Once I made my shift, I was sitting there teaching them how to be soldiers, and they were teaching me how to be a civilian. So it all worked out pretty good.
Well, we're running out of time, so I'm going to ask you this last question. Looking back on Iraq now from an advantage of hindsight, what do you think the United States did right or the United States did wrong in regard to Iraq?
Well, I think what we did wrong was destabilize that area for quite a while. A lot of treasure was lost over there, American treasure. Should have we went? Hindsight being 2020, probably not. Right? Were there indeed weapons of mass destruction found over there? Not that I know of. But was there a brutal dictator over there? Absolutely. Are the Iraqi people better off? I think they are. Do they know? There's elections over there now. They have. I think they know two sides of that pendulum, right? Where, you have a brutal dictator, and you have your freedom and an elected government, and this generation now knows both sides of that, and I do think that at the end of the day we are better off, or they're better off over there. So in that region, we need allies over there. We need allies in that region. You have Iran over there. They're not our friends, and Iraq is a great. I think it's strategically positioned where, having a friend in that neck of the woods is a good thing. So,
Well, again, First Sergeant Colella, I want to thank you for your service to this country, and thank you for coming here today and sharing your story.
Well, I appreciate
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for doing it.
This is a project authorized by Congress and administered by the Library of Congress. The objective is to interview and video as many as possible the stories of those veterans from World War II to the present. The library archives these videos and make them available to the public both in person and online. In addition, the library also encourages local venues such as historical societies and museums like the one we're in at the present time, New Smyrna Museum of History, to keep these and make them available to the local population.